The dust had already settled thick on Hannah Reeves' shoulders before the sun climbed high enough to scorch the Arizona desert, and she knew today would break her if she let it. She gripped the wooden plow handle tighter, her palms raw and bleeding through the thin cotton gloves that had worn through weeks ago, and leaned her full weight into pushing the blade through soil that felt more like stone than earth. The mule ahead of her had gone lame 3 days prior, which meant she was doing the work of both beast and farmer now, dragging the plow across 20 acres of stubborn land that her late uncle had left her in his will 6 months ago. Superior, Arizona in the spring of 1884 was no place for a woman alone, especially not one trying to work a failing cotton farm with no help and no money to hire any. Hannah had arrived from Missouri with dreams of starting fresh after her parents died of fever, only to discover that her Uncle Thomas had passed just 2 weeks before her train pulled into the station. The land was hers, but so were his debts. The bank had given her until harvest time to prove the farm could produce, or they would seize everything, and she would be left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a one-way ticket back east to marry whatever man would have a 22-year-old woman with no prospects and no dowry. She would not go back. She would die in these fields before she became some stranger's burden. The morning stretched long and merciless. Hannah's legs trembled with exhaustion as she completed another row, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her throat. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something thick and suffocating. Sweat soaked through her simple work dress, plastered her dark blonde hair to her neck and forehead. She had stopped noticing the ache in her shoulders hours ago, but now it returned with vengeance, a white-hot pain that shot down her spine with every step. She heard the horse before she saw it, the steady clip of hooves on the hard-packed road that ran along the eastern edge of her property. Hannah did not look up. Strangers passing by had become a source of anxiety rather than hope. Most just stared at her with pity or contempt. Some of the men from town had made offers that had nothing to do with honest work and everything to do with what they thought a desperate woman might agree to. She had learned to keep her head down and her hands busy. The hoofbeats stopped. "That is no way to break ground," a man's voice called out, not unkind but matter of fact. "You will kill yourself before you turn half that field." Hannah straightened slowly, using the plow handle to support her weight. Her vision swam for a moment, black spots dancing at the edges. She blinked them away and focused on the rider. He sat atop a tall bay horse, his silhouette dark against the blazing sky. As her eyes adjusted, she took in the details. A man perhaps 27 or 28 years old, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. A working cowboy by the look of him, lean and weathered, with the kind of calloused hands she could see even from 20 feet away. "I will manage," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had not spoken to another person in 3 days. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion and walked his horse closer, stopping at the fence line that separated the road from her fields. Now she could see his face properly. He had strong features, a straight nose, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that were a startling clear blue beneath dark brows. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of beard, and there was something in his expression that looked like genuine concern rather than the calculated interest she had come to dread. "I am Vincent Marsh," he said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "I have been working cattle drives up from Mexico, but I am looking for something more permanent. This is Thomas Reeves' place, is it not?" "Was," Hannah corrected, letting go of the plow and immediately regretting it as her knees nearly buckled. She locked them straight through sheer will. "He died last November. The land is mine now." Vincent's eyes traveled over the field, the sagging barn in the distance, the small house with its missing shingles, and then back to her. She saw him taking in her condition, the way she swayed on her feet, the blood on her gloves, the desperate exhaustion that must have been written across every line of her body. "You are working this alone," he said, "not a question. I have no choice." Hannah lifted her chin, ready for whatever judgmental comment would come next. She had heard them all. "A woman has no business running a farm. You should find yourself a husband. This is man's work. The bank will take everything if I cannot bring in a harvest, so I will bring in a harvest." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Then he looked back at the field, at the maybe 3 acres she had managed to turn in the past 2 weeks, at the 17 acres that remained. "You will not make it," he said quietly. "Not alone, not in time for planting season. That soil needs to be broken, fertilized, and harrowed before you can even think about putting seed in the ground. You have maybe 2 weeks before it is too late." Something in Hannah's chest cracked at hearing the truth spoken aloud. She had been pushing the reality away, telling herself that if she just worked harder, slept less, ignored the pain and exhaustion, she could somehow do the impossible. But this stranger had looked at her fields and seen what she had been refusing to admit. She was going to fail. "Thank you for your assessment," she said stiffly, turning back toward the plow. "I should get back to work. From now on, we work together." Hannah froze, certain she had misheard. She turned back slowly. "What?" Vincent had already tied his horse to the fence and was climbing over, landing lightly on her side of the property line. "You need help. I need work and a place to stay. I am a good hand with horses and I know farming. I can break that field in a week with proper equipment and a fresh team." "I cannot pay you," Hannah said immediately. "I have almost nothing. The bank took everything my uncle had saved for the debts, and what little I brought with me has gone to buying food and fixing the well pump. I cannot even feed myself properly, let alone hire a hand." "Room and board," Vincent said, already walking toward her. "A place to sleep, meals, and a percentage of the harvest profit when it comes in. If it comes in. If it does not, then I lose nothing but time, and I have plenty of that." Hannah stared at him, trying to understand the angle, the trick, the inevitable catch. "Why would you work for maybe nothing?" He had reached her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. They were kind, she realized with a start. Genuinely kind, with none of the calculation or cruel amusement she had learned to recognize. "Because I know what it is like to have everything hanging by a thread," Vincent said simply. "And because watching you kill yourself alone out here when I could help does not sit right. So, do we have an agreement?" Hannah's throat tightened. She wanted to refuse out of pure stubborn pride, but pride would not save her farm. Pride would not keep a roof over her head or prevent her from being shipped back east like a piece of failed merchandise. This man was offering her the only chance she had. "The barn has a loft," she heard herself say. "It is not much, but it is dry and there are blankets. I can manage breakfast and dinner, though do not expect anything fancy. And if we bring in a harvest, you get 20% of the profit after the bank takes their share." Vincent held out his hand. "Deal." Hannah pulled off her ruined glove and shook his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against hers, the strength in his grip. "I am Hannah Reeves." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Reeves." He released her hand and looked at the plow, then at her with an expression that might have been admiration or concern or both. "Now sit down before you fall down and let me handle this. We start fresh tomorrow with a proper plan." Pride flared again, hot and defensive, but her body betrayed her by swaying dangerously. Vincent caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "I am fine," she protested weakly. "You are half dead on your feet," he corrected, his tone firm but not unkind. "When did you last eat a full meal?" Hannah tried to remember and could not. Yesterday, I think. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Vincent muttered. He guided her toward a scraggly cottonwood at the field's edge, the only shade for acres. Sit, I mean it. I am going to fetch my gear from my horse and settle him in your barn. Then I am going to look at what supplies you have. You are going to rest and drink water. We cannot work together if you drop dead before we start. Hannah sank down onto the hard ground, her back against the tree trunk, and realized with distant alarm that she was not sure she could stand back up even if she wanted to. Her muscles had gone from trembling to completely boneless in the space of a few minutes. Vincent disappeared toward his horse, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his own body. Hannah watched him through half-closed eyes, still not quite believing this was happening. Strangers did not just appear and offer help for practically nothing. There had to be a catch. Men always wanted something from women, especially women in vulnerable positions. But what choice did she have except to trust him? She was out of options and nearly out of time. Vincent returned carrying his saddlebags and a canteen. He crouched beside her and held out the canteen. Drink. Hannah took it with shaking hands and forced herself to swallow slowly, even though she wanted to gulp it down. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. I will need to go into town tomorrow, Vincent said, settling back on his heels and watching her with that steady, assessing gaze. We need a fresh plow blade, fertilizer if we can afford it, and seed. Also, you need proper work gloves and a hat that actually blocks the sun. What is your credit situation with the general store? Terrible, Hannah admitted. My uncle owed them money too. I have been paying it down, but they will not extend me any more credit until the debt is clear. Vincent nodded slowly, thinking, I have some savings. Not much, but enough to get us what we need to start. We can consider it an investment in that harvest percentage. That is too much risk for you, Hannah said, but even as she protested, she felt a dangerous flutter of hope in her chest. That is my decision to make. He stood and offered her his hand. Can you walk to the house? Of course I can walk, Hannah said, stung. But when she tried to rise on her own, her legs refused to cooperate. Vincent's hand remained extended, patient, and finally she took it and let him pull her to her feet. The world tilted sideways. Vincent's arm went around her waist, supporting most of her weight as they walked slowly toward the small adobe house that sat 100 yards from the field. Hannah's face burned with humiliation, but she could not have made it without his help, and they both knew it. This is not weakness, Vincent said quietly, as if he could read her thoughts. This is what happens when you push yourself past human limits. You should be proud you lasted this long, not ashamed that you need help now. Something in his tone, the complete absence of condescension, made Hannah's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back furiously. She had not cried once in the 6 months since her uncle died. Not when the bank threatened foreclosure. Not when the town women gossiped about her. Not even when she lay awake at night wondering if she would truly rather die than admit defeat. She would not start crying now just because a stranger was being kind to her. They reached the house and Vincent helped her inside. The interior was sparse, just a single room with a cookstove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves holding her meager supplies. It was clean, at least. Hannah had always kept it clean, one of the few things she could still control. Vincent guided her to one of the chairs, and she sank into it gratefully. He moved around the small space with the ease of someone who had lived in many such places, finding a pot, checking the water supply, locating the food. You have flour, lard, a bit of salt pork, and some dried beans, he said, taking inventory. No vegetables, no fruit, no eggs. I had chickens, Hannah said tiredly. A coyote got them last month. I have not had time or money to replace them. Vincent made a thoughtful sound and set about building up the fire in the stove. Hannah watched him work, surprised by the domesticity of it. Most cowboys she had encountered were rough men who expected women to do all the cooking and cleaning. This man moved around a kitchen like he had done it 1,000 times. "I grew up without a mother," Vincent said without turning around, again seeming to read her unspoken question. "My father raised me and my younger sister on a ranch in Texas. If you wanted to eat, you learned to cook. If you wanted clean clothes, you learned to wash them. He did not believe in separating work by who did it, just that it got done." "That must have been unusual," Hannah said. "It was." Vincent's voice carried a note of old grief. "My father was an unusual man. He passed 3 years ago. Fever, like your parents. My sister married and moved to California with her husband, and I sold the ranch to pay off what we owed. Been drifting since then, taking work where I could find it." "I am sorry," Hannah said softly. "About your father." "I am sorry about your parents and your uncle." Vincent glanced back at her with a small, sad smile. "Seems we have both had our share of loss." He finished preparing a simple meal of fried salt pork and beans, somehow making it more appetizing than when Hannah fixed the same ingredients for herself. He brought her a plate and sat across from her with his own, and they ate in comfortable silence. Hannah had not realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach, and then she had to force herself to eat slowly to avoid getting sick. "Tell me about the farm," Vincent said when they were finished. "How much land total? What did your uncle usually plant? What is the water situation?" Hannah laid out the details as best she could. 20 acres total, though only 16 were really suitable for farming. Her uncle had planted cotton primarily, with a small vegetable garden for personal use. There was a well with a working pump, and irrigation channels that needed clearing but were functional. The equipment was old but serviceable, or had been before the mule went lame, and she tried to use herself as a draft animal. Vincent listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he knew far more about farming than she did. By the time she finished, he had a thoughtful expression on his face. "Cotton is good, but it is a risk putting everything into one crop," he said. "If we can afford it, we should put half the acreage in cotton and half in feed corn. Corn is more forgiving, and there is always a market for it with the ranchers and the mine operations. Diversifying means if one crop fails, the other might still save us." "That makes sense," Hannah agreed, grateful to let someone else do the planning for once. Her mind felt fuzzy with exhaustion, incapable of complex thought. "For now, you need rest," Vincent said firmly. He stood and collected their plates, washing them in the basin with the same efficient competence he seemed to bring to everything. "Proper rest. That means sleep, not lying awake worrying about everything that needs doing. I am here now, and I promise you we will get this farm running. Trust me." Hannah wanted to argue, but her body had reached its absolute limit. "I do not even know you," she said, but the words came out weak, already half asleep. "Then you are taking a leap of faith." Vincent dried his hands and moved toward the door. "Get some sleep, Miss Reeves. I will be in the barn if you need anything." He let himself out quietly, and Hannah sat for a moment in the sudden silence, trying to process the fact that her entire situation had changed in the space of a single afternoon. She had been alone and failing. Now she had help. A partner, if only temporarily. She barely made it to the bed before exhaustion claimed her completely. Hannah woke to the sound of hammering and the smell of coffee. Sunlight streamed through the small window, bright and cheerful, and for a confused moment she could not remember where she was or why every muscle in her body ached like she had been trampled by horses. Then memory returned in a rush. The fields. The cowboy. Vincent Marsh. She sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her shoulders and lower back. Every part of her hurt, the consequence of weeks of impossible physical labor. But underneath, the pain was something else, the absence of soul-crushing panic. For the first time since arriving in Arizona, she had slept through the night without waking every few hours to mentally catalog everything that needed doing, every way she was falling behind, every possible disaster waiting to happen. Hannah stood carefully and looked down at herself, realizing she had slept in her work dress, which was now hopelessly wrinkled and stiff with dried sweat. She moved to the wash basin and did her best to clean up, then changed into her only other dress, a faded blue cotton that had been her mother's. It was a bit too big in the shoulders, but it was clean. The hammering continued outside. Hannah braided her hair, pinned it up, and ventured out into the morning. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. Vincent had already been awake and working for what must have been hours. The barn door, which had been hanging crooked on broken hinges, was now properly mounted and swinging smoothly. The fence along the road had been reinforced in several places. And Vincent himself was currently on the roof of the barn, replacing missing shingles that she had been telling herself she would get to eventually. He saw her and waved, then climbed down the ladder with easy agility. "Good morning. There is coffee in the pot by the fire if you want some." "You have been busy," Hannah said, still taking in all the repairs. "Just handling the urgent things while you rested." He landed on the ground and brushed sawdust off his shirt. "The barn was not secure enough for my horse, and those holes in the roof would have been a problem come monsoon season. Better to fix it now while we have time." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost made her dizzy. "Thank you. I have been trying to keep up with repairs, but there is always so much to do and never enough hours. That is what I am here for now." Vincent's expression was warm, his blue eyes bright in the morning sun. "I found the problem with your mule, by the way. He has an abscess in his back left hoof. Nothing fatal, but he needs treatment and rest. I cleaned it out and made a poultice. He should be sound again in a week or so." "You did not have to do that," Hannah said, but she was smiling. The mule was old, but he was a good animal, and she had felt terrible about his suffering even as she desperately wished he could work. "I like animals better than most people," Vincent said with a shrug. "Anyway, I need to ride into Superior this morning and pick up supplies. Make me a list of anything you need personally, anything at all, and I will get it. We cannot afford to have you getting sick or more run down than you already are." Hannah wanted to protest that she did not need anything, but that was pride talking again. The truth was she desperately needed a dozen things: proper soap, lamp oil, a sewing kit to repair her clothes, food that was not just preserved meat and beans. She wrote out a careful list, trying to keep it minimal, and Vincent looked it over without comment before folding it into his shirt pocket. "I should have fresh produce too when I get back," he said. "There is a Mexican family on the edge of town who sells vegetables from their garden. They will likely give me a better price than the general store." "How do you know that?" Hannah asked. "I passed their place on my way here and stopped to water my horse. The grandmother was kind enough to offer me food, and we got to talking." Vincent collected his hat and headed for the barn to get his horse. "I will be back by early afternoon. Do not try to work the fields alone while I am gone. I mean it. Rest another day and let your body recover, or you will be useless when the real work starts." Hannah wanted to argue, but he was already mounting his horse and tipping his hat to her, riding off down the road with the confidence of a man who expected to be obeyed. She found herself smiling despite her irritation at being given orders on her own property. With nothing else to do, Hannah spent the morning attending to tasks she had been neglecting, washing clothes, mending tears in her threadbare linens, airing out the house. It felt strange to do domestic work in the middle of a weekday, almost indulgent, but Vincent was right. Her body needed recovery time. She could feel it in every movement, the deep exhaustion that a single night's sleep had not fully erased. By early afternoon, her stomach was reminding her that she had not eaten yet, and she was considering making a sparse lunch when she heard Vincent's horse returning. She went outside and was startled to see that he was not alone. A second horse followed his, this one pulling a small cart loaded with supplies. Vincent dismounted and began unloading bags and boxes, his expression satisfied. "I got everything on your list, and then some. Also borrowed this cart from the livery. We can return it in a few days once we have everything sorted." Hannah approached slowly, watching as he pulled out sacks of flour and cornmeal, cans of vegetables and fruit, fresh eggs packed carefully in straw, onions and potatoes, and even tomatoes. There was fabric for new clothes, lamp oil, soap that actually smelled pleasant, seed packets, tools, everything they needed and more. "This must have cost a fortune," she said faintly. "It was not cheap," Vincent admitted, "but it was necessary. I also had an interesting conversation with the man at the general store about your uncle's debts." Hannah tensed. "What about them?" "He said your uncle owed him $43, and that you have been paying it down at about $5 a month. At that rate, it will take you another 8 months to clear it, and by then you will owe more because he has been charging interest." "I know," Hannah said tiredly, "but I have no way to pay it faster." Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a receipt. "Already paid. The debt is cleared." Hannah stared at the paper he held out, her mind refusing to process what he was saying. "You cannot have. That is too much money. I can never repay you." "You will repay me with a percentage of the harvest profits, same as we agreed," Vincent said calmly. "Think of it as an investment." The man agreed to extend a store credit now that the old debt is gone, which means we can get what we need for the farm without having to pay everything up front. It makes good business sense. "It makes no sense at all," Hannah said, her voice rising with emotion she could not quite name. "You do not know me. You have no guarantee this farm will succeed. You just gave away most of your savings for a stranger based on nothing but hope and a handshake." Vincent set the receipt on top of one of the supply boxes and looked at her steadily. "I told you yesterday that I know what it is like to have everything hanging by a thread. When my father got sick, we had no money for a doctor. A neighbor, someone we barely knew, paid for medicine and sat with him for 3 days straight trying to keep the fever down. My father died anyway, but that man's kindness meant we were not alone in the worst time of our lives. I have never forgotten that." He paused, his blue eyes intense. "Sometimes people just need help, and if I can provide it, why would I not? Life is hard enough without refusing to reach out a hand when it costs you nothing but money." Hannah felt the tears she had been holding back for months finally break through. They spilled down her cheeks hot and unstoppable, and she turned away, mortified to be crying in front of this man who had already seen her at her lowest. She felt rather than saw Vincent move closer. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "It is all right," he said quietly. "You have been carrying everything alone for a long time. You are allowed to feel overwhelmed when that changes." "I do not cry," Hannah managed to say through the tears that contradicted her words completely. "Everyone cries sometimes," Vincent said, "even cowboys who are supposed to be tough." There was a hint of humor in his voice that made it easier to breathe. Hannah laughed wetly and wiped at her face with her hands. "I cannot believe I am falling apart the moment things start going right. That is usually when it happens, when you finally feel safe enough to let go. His hand dropped from her shoulder, but the warmth of it lingered. Come on. Let us put these supplies away, and then I want to show you my plan for the fields. They spent the next hour organizing everything, and Hannah marveled at how much easier work was with another person to help. What would have taken her all day alone was done in a fraction of the time, with plenty of energy left over. Vincent had a system for everything, organizing the supplies logically, storing things in ways that made sense for easy access later. When they finished, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the kitchen table. It was a rough map of her property with sections marked out in pencil. "Here is what I am thinking," he said, leaning over the map. "We break the full 16 acres over the next week. That is aggressive but doable with proper equipment and a fresh mule team. I talked to a man in town who is willing to loan us 2 mules for a percentage of the harvest. Once the ground is broken, we section it out. 8 acres of cotton here on the western section where the irrigation is best, 6 acres of feed corn here on the eastern section, and we leave these 2 acres for a proper vegetable garden. That will provide food for us and extra to sell in town for immediate income while we wait for the main crops to mature." "That is brilliant," Hannah said, studying the map. "I never would have thought of that." "You have been too busy surviving to think strategically," Vincent said. "That is not a criticism, just a fact. But now you have me, so we can do both." The easy confidence in his voice made something warm settle in Hannah's chest. For so long, every decision had felt like life or death because it was. Having someone to share the burden, someone who actually knew what they were doing, felt like being allowed to breathe fully for the first time in months. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning in detail. What seed varieties to plant, when to plant them, how to manage the irrigation schedule, what resources they would need at each stage. Vincent had a depth of knowledge that surprised Hannah. He knew which crops were best for Arizona's climate, how to recognize and treat soil problems, how to maximize yield without depleting the land. "You said you grew up on a ranch," Hannah said at one point. "How do you know so much about crop farming?" "My father's ranch was diversified," Vincent explained. "We ran cattle, but we also grew hay and feed crops to sustain them through winter and drought. He believed in not depending on any single income source, taught me everything he knew about both ranching and farming." His expression grew distant with memory. "He used to say that the land will take care of you if you take care of it first. That respecting what you have is more important than trying to squeeze every last dollar out of it." "He sounds like he was a good man," Hannah said softly. "The best I ever knew." Vincent's smile was tinged with sadness. "I wish you could have met him. He would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" "Because you are a fighter. You do not give up even when everything is stacked against you. He always respected that quality in people." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I am not sure fighting is the same as being smart enough to ask for help when you need it. It is when asking for help means admitting you are not invincible." Vincent met her eyes across the table, and something in the air between them shifted, became charged with an awareness that had not been there before. "That takes more courage than most people have." For a moment, neither of them moved. Hannah found herself noticing details she had been too exhausted to process before. The way Vincent's dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the genuine warmth in his expression when he looked at her. He was a handsome man, she realized, but more than that, he was kind. Genuinely, deeply kind in a way she had not encountered in longer than she could remember. Vincent cleared his throat and looked back down at the map, breaking the moment. "We should start at dawn tomorrow. The earlier we begin, the more we can get done before the heat becomes unbearable." Agreed, Hannah said, grateful for the return to practical matters. She stood and began preparing dinner, hyper-aware of Vincent's presence in the small space even as he moved to give her room to work. They ate together as the sun set, talking about inconsequential things. The town's layout, the neighbors Hannah barely knew, the weather patterns Vincent had observed during his travels. It was the most normal Hannah had felt in months, just two people sharing a meal and conversation, no desperation or fear lurking beneath every word. After dinner, Vincent excused himself to the barn, and Hannah was left alone with her thoughts. She prepared for bed slowly, her mind churning with everything that had changed in just 2 days. A stranger had appeared and turned her entire situation around, asking for nothing more than a place to stay and a percentage of profits that might never materialize. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Hannah could not figure out what the catch might be. Vincent had been nothing but respectful and helpful. He had not made any inappropriate advances or suggestions. He had not tried to take control of her property or undermine her authority. He had simply offered partnership and followed through on every promise. Maybe, Hannah thought as sleep finally claimed her, maybe some people really were just good. Maybe the world had not beaten all the kindness out of everyone. Maybe she had been lucky enough to find one of the decent ones when she needed him most. She slept deeply and woke before dawn to the sound of movement outside. By the time she had dressed and emerged from the house, Vincent already had the borrowed mules hitched and was checking their harnesses. He looked up as she approached and smiled. Ready to work, Hannah smiled back, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. Ready. They fell into a rhythm over the following days that felt as natural as breathing. Vincent handled the heavy work of breaking ground, guiding the mules with patient expertise, while Hannah managed the irrigation channels, cleared rocks and debris, and prepared sections for planting. They worked from dawn until the heat became too intense around midday, then retreated to the shade to rest and eat before resuming work in the late afternoon when temperatures dropped. It was still hard labor, but shared effort made it bearable. More than bearable, actually. Hannah found herself enjoying the work in a way she never had when doing it alone. Vincent had a way of making even the most tedious tasks feel purposeful and manageable. He told stories while they worked, tales of cattle drives and adventures in various towns, always with a self-deprecating humor that made her laugh. And she noticed other things too. The way he always made sure she drank enough water and took breaks even when she wanted to push through. How he fixed things around the property without being asked. A loose shutter here, a wobbly table leg there. The care he took with the animals, speaking to them gently and making sure they were comfortable. These small kindnesses accumulated, building a picture of a man who noticed what needed doing and simply did it. By the end of the first week, they had broken all 16 acres and begun the fertilizing process. It was ahead of schedule, and Hannah felt the first real stirring of hope that they might actually succeed. "We are going to make it," she said one evening as they surveyed the transformed fields. The land that had looked impossible now appeared tamed, ready to receive seed and produce life. "Never doubted it," Vincent said, but his satisfied expression suggested he had shared her worries even if he had not voiced them. They stood side by side in the gathering dusk, and Hannah became acutely aware of how close he was, the warmth of his body radiating in the cooling air. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye and found him already looking at her, his expression soft with something she was afraid to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. I do not think I have said that clearly enough. You saved me." "We saved each other," Vincent corrected. "I needed this as much as you did. a place to belong even temporarily. Work that matters. You gave me that. It does not have to be temporary, Hannah heard herself say. The words escaped before she could think better of them, and she felt her face flush. I mean, if you wanted to stay on after the harvest, as a partner, we could draw up a proper agreement, split everything fairly. This farm does better with two people running it. Vincent turned to face her fully, his blue eyes searching hers. Is that what you want? Yes, Hannah said, and realized she meant it with her whole heart. Yes, I do. Then that is what we will do. His smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Partners, for as long as you will have me. Something shifted between them in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that went deeper than gratitude or friendship. Hannah felt it in the air, in the way Vincent looked at her like she was something precious and unexpected. Her heart beat faster, and when he reached out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, she leaned into the touch without thinking. Hannah, he said, his voice low and rough. I need you to know that a shout from the road interrupted him. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast, silhouetted against the last light of day. As the figure drew closer, Hannah recognized Tom Fletcher, one of the men from town who worked at the mining office. Miss Reeves, Tom called, reining his horse to a stop at the fence. There is trouble in town, fire at the church. They are asking for anyone who can help to come quick. Vincent was already moving, running for the barn to get his horse. Hannah followed, her mind racing. The church was the center of Superior's small community. If it burned down, the loss would be devastating. Within minutes, they were both mounted and riding hard toward town, the smoke visible as a dark column rising against the twilight sky. By the time they arrived, half the town had gathered, forming bucket brigades from the well to the burning building. The flames had consumed the church's roof and were spreading down the walls. Vincent and Hannah dismounted and immediately joined the effort, taking positions in separate lines. The work was hot, exhausting, and chaotic. Smoke burned Hannah's eyes and throat, and water sloshed over her dress as she passed bucket after bucket up the line. Beside her, townspeople she barely knew worked with the same desperate urgency. The fire raged for hours. By the time they finally got it under control, the church was a smoking ruin, but the surrounding buildings had been saved. The crowd stood exhausted and ash-covered, surveying the damage in grim silence. Could have been worse, someone said. Could have taken the whole town. Still a tragedy, the minister, Reverend Thomas, said sadly. He was an older man with kind eyes, and Hannah had spoken with him a few times at the general store. That church stood for 30 years, built it with our own hands when this town was first founded. Then we will build it again, Vincent said. His voice carried in the quiet, drawing everyone's attention. With our own hands, same as before. I am a fair carpenter, and I am willing to donate time to help rebuild. A murmur ran through the crowd, and then others began volunteering as well. Hannah felt a swell of emotion watching the community come together, watching Vincent stand at the center of it, offering help without hesitation. This was who he was, she realized. Someone who showed up when needed, who gave freely, who made things better just by being present. It was past midnight when they finally rode back to the farm, both too exhausted for conversation. They tended the horses in silence and went to their separate sleeping spaces, but Hannah lay awake for a long time thinking about the moment before Tom Fletcher had interrupted them. Vincent had been about to say something important. She was sure of it, and she had wanted to hear it with an intensity that surprised her. Somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing when or how, Vincent Marsh had become essential to her. Not just as a farm hand or a partner, but as something more. Something she was not quite ready to name but could no longer ignore. The next morning they slept late, both recovering from the previous night's exertion. When Hannah finally emerged from the house, she found Vincent already up and repairing the fence around the vegetable garden plot. "Morning," he called. "I figured we could take it a bit easier today after last night. Maybe just work on getting the garden area ready for planting." "That sounds perfect," Hannah agreed. Her arms ached from passing buckets, and she suspected Vincent felt the same even if he did not show it. They worked together preparing the garden beds, turning soil and mixing in fertilizer. It was peaceful, meditative work, and as the morning stretched on, Hannah found herself stealing glances at Vincent, admiring the capable way he moved, the focus in his expression. "You were going to say something last night," she said suddenly, unable to hold the words back. Before Tom Fletcher arrived. "What was it?" Vincent's hands stilled in the dirt. He sat back on his heels and looked at her, his expression serious. "I was going to tell you that working here with you these past couple weeks has been the happiest I have been in a long time, maybe ever. And that He trailed off, then took a breath and continued. "I care about you, Hannah, more than I probably should given how short a time we have known each other. But I do. I care about you, and I think you are remarkable, and I want you to know that even if you do not feel the same way." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. "What if I do feel the same way?" Vincent's eyes widened slightly. "Do you?" "Yes," Hannah said, the word coming out breathless and certain. "I have never met anyone like you, Vincent. You appeared when I had nothing, and you have given me everything: help, hope, kindness, respect. But more than that, you have given me yourself, your time and effort and care. How could I not care for you in return?" They were both still kneeling in the garden dirt, staring at each other across 3 feet of space that suddenly felt like a vast distance. Then Vincent moved, closing the gap between them, and his dirt-stained hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Hannah breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Hannah's hands came up to grip his shoulders and she leaned into him, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and real. Vincent's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and Hannah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since about the second day I was here." Hannah laughed, giddy and slightly disbelieving. "I have wanted you to do it for almost as long." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the morning sunlight, and Hannah felt something settle deep in her chest. This was right. This was real. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Over the following weeks, something blossomed between them that was as essential as the crops they planted. They worked side by side during the day, their partnership deepening with every shared task. And in the evenings, they sat close together planning and talking and stealing kisses when the moment felt right. Vincent was careful with her, always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the feelings between them grew stronger with each passing day, impossible to ignore or deny. The town began to take notice. When they went to Superior together for supplies or church rebuilding efforts, Hannah saw the looks and heard the whispers. Some were disapproving. A single woman and a man living on the same property without being married was scandalous by any measure. But others were cautiously supportive, recognizing that Hannah's situation was unusual and that Vincent had been nothing but honorable. "People are talking," Hannah said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Let them talk," Vincent said calmly. He was whittling a piece of wood, crafting what would eventually be a new handle for one of their tools. We know the truth of our situation. That is all that matters. It could damage both our reputations, Hannah persisted. Make things harder when we try to sell the harvest. Vincent set down his whittling and took her hand. Then maybe we should stop giving them something to gossip about. Hannah's heart skipped. What do you mean? I mean maybe we should get married. Vincent's blue eyes were steady on hers. I know it has only been a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you, Hannah Reeves. I want to spend my life working this land with you, building something lasting together. If you will have me. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but these were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, yes, of course I will have you. Vincent pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and Hannah thought that she had never imagined she could be this happy. 6 months ago, she had been alone and terrified, convinced she would lose everything. Now she had a partner, a love, and a real future stretching out before her, full of possibility. They were married 2 weeks later in what remained of the church's foundation, surrounded by the townspeople who had slowly come to accept them. The ceremony was simple, conducted by Reverend Thomas, with Hannah wearing a dress made from fabric Vincent had bought in town and Vincent in his best clean shirt and trousers. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the small crowd wiped away tears. The community held a modest celebration afterward, and Hannah was surprised by how many people came to wish them well. The general store owner brought food. The family Vincent had befriended gifted them fresh vegetables and a beautiful hand-woven blanket. Even some of the townspeople who had been cool toward her before offered genuine congratulations. "Seems like you two are good for each other," Tom Fletcher said, shaking Vincent's hand. "And good for that farm. Heard you have one of the best-looking cotton crops in the area this year." "We have worked hard," Vincent agreed, his arm around Hannah's waist. "But it will all come down to how the harvest goes." The harvest began in late summer, and it was every bit as intense as the planting had been. They worked dawn to dusk picking cotton, carefully gathering the corn, tending the vegetable garden that had produced abundantly. Vincent hired temporary workers from town to help with the cotton harvest. Men he paid fair wages from their dwindling cash reserves, betting everything on a good return. The gamble paid off. The cotton yield was excellent, the corn robust and healthy. When Vincent took their first load to market in town, he returned with a receipt that made Hannah's hands shake. "This is more than enough to pay the bank, buy next season's seed, and have money left over," she said, staring at the numbers. "This is security," Vincent corrected, pulling her into a hug. "This is proof that we can make this work year after year. This is our future." They paid off the bank debt the next day, and Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. The land was truly hers now, theirs, with no one holding a claim over it. As autumn arrived and the harvest was fully gathered and sold, Vincent and Hannah turned their attention to improving the property. They bought chickens and a milk cow, expanded the barn, repaired the house more extensively. Vincent built proper furniture to replace the rough pieces that had been there before. A larger bed for the two of them, chairs that did not wobble, shelves and cabinets for storage. The work was constant but satisfying. They fell into the rhythm of married life with surprising ease, learning each other's habits and preferences, negotiating the small compromises that made sharing a life possible. Vincent was naturally neat and organized, which balanced Hannah's tendency to leave projects half-finished as she moved on to the next urgent task. Hannah was better with money and planning, which complemented Vincent's skills with physical labor and problem-solving. But more than their practical compatibility, they simply enjoyed being together. Vincent made her laugh with his dry humor and unexpected observations. Hannah challenged him intellectually, pushing him to think beyond just the next season to long-term plans for the farm. They talked for hours in the evenings, shared comfortable silences during the day, and came together at night with a passion that still surprised them both with its intensity. Winter came, slower and milder than the harsh Missouri winters Hannah remembered from childhood, but enough to give them a break from the constant outdoor work. They spent the quiet months planning the next year's crops, repairing equipment, and working on projects inside the house. It was during this time that Hannah began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited to be certain, tracking the signs her body was giving her, and when she was sure, she chose a quiet evening by the fire to tell Vincent. "I have news," she said, setting down the shirt she was mending. Vincent looked up from the harness he was oiling, immediately attentive to her tone. "What kind of news? The good kind, I hope." Hannah took a breath, suddenly nervous even though she knew Vincent would be happy. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Vincent's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. He set aside the harness and crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "Truly?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "Truly," Hannah confirmed, smiling through sudden tears. "I think the baby will come in late summer, around August." Vincent let out a whoop of happiness and gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful not to squeeze too tight. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Hannah, I do not even have words." "Happy words, I hope," she said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "The happiest." He pulled back to look at her face, his expression turning serious. "We are going to be good parents, I promise you that. This child will grow up knowing they are loved and wanted." "I know," Hannah said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I have never doubted that." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and into spring. Vincent became even more protective than before, insisting Hannah avoid heavy work and rest frequently. It was frustrating at times, but Hannah recognized it came from love and let him fuss over her. They hired a young man from town named Peter to help with the spring planting, a teenage boy whose family had fallen on hard times. Vincent taught him everything about farming with the same patient expertise he had shown Hannah, and Peter proved to be a quick study and hard worker. As Hannah's belly swelled with new life, so did the crops in the fields. It felt symbolic somehow, both the farm and their family growing and flourishing together. They painted the inside of the house, prepared a corner for the baby's cradle that Vincent crafted himself, and made plans for the future that now included 3 instead of 2. In July, when Hannah was very pregnant and uncomfortable in the summer heat, Vincent's sister Alice arrived unexpectedly from California. She was a cheerful woman a few years younger than Vincent, traveling with her husband Robert and their 2 small children. They had come to visit after receiving Vincent's letter about his marriage and the coming baby. "I had to meet the woman who finally got my brother to settle down," Alice said, hugging Hannah warmly despite her enormous belly. "He wrote that you are remarkable, and I can already tell he was not exaggerating." Having Alice there was a blessing Hannah had not known she needed. The 2 women became fast friends, and Alice's practical experience with children eased many of Hannah's anxieties about the coming birth. When Hannah went into labor on a sweltering August afternoon, Alice was the one who stayed calm and confident, helping her through each contraction while Vincent paced outside like a caged animal. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. There were moments when Hannah was certain she could not continue, when the pain was too much, and she wanted to give up. But Alice held her hand and Vincent's voice filtered through the door, steady and encouraging, and somehow she found the strength to keep going. When the baby finally came, emerging into the world with a furious wail, Hannah burst into tears of exhaustion and relief and overwhelming love. Alice cleaned the infant quickly and placed the baby on Hannah's chest. "It is a boy," Alice said, her own eyes wet with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Vincent was allowed in then, and the look on his face when he saw his son was something Hannah knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Pure wonder, fierce love, and a kind of terrified joy all mixed together. "May I hold him?" Vincent asked quietly, and Hannah carefully transferred the tiny bundle into his arms. Vincent sat on the edge of the bed, cradling the baby with surprising confidence for someone who had never held an infant before. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father. I am going to do my best by you, I promise." "What should we name him?" Hannah asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. They had discussed names but never settled on one, waiting to see what felt right when the baby arrived. Vincent looked down at his son's tiny, perfect face and then at Hannah. "What about William?" he suggested. "After your father." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had not expected Vincent to remember her mentioning her father's name in passing months ago, but he remembered everything. "William Thomas," she said, "for both our fathers." "William Thomas Marsh," Vincent repeated, testing how it sounded. He smiled. "It is perfect." Alice and her family stayed for another week, helping Hannah recover and teaching both new parents the basics of infant care. By the time they left, Hannah felt more confident in her ability to keep her son alive, though she was sad to see Alice go. "Write to me often," Alice said as they prepared to depart. "And if you ever need anything, anything at all, you send word. You are family now." After they left, Hannah and Vincent settled into the new reality of life with a baby. William was a good infant, healthy and generally content, but he still required constant attention. They took turns walking him when he fussed at night, changed endless diapers, and marveled at every tiny change in his appearance and behavior. The farm work continued, though at a slower pace with Hannah still recovering. Vincent handled most of the physical labor with Peter's help, while Hannah managed what she could while caring for William. It was exhausting, but there was joy in it too. Watching Vincent with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he brought to fatherhood, made Hannah fall in love with him all over again. The second harvest came and went, as successful as the first. With 2 good years behind them, they were able to expand even further, buying more equipment and livestock, hiring Peter on permanently, and discussing the possibility of eventually purchasing the adjacent property if it ever came up for sale. William grew from an infant into a toddler, and the farm grew with him. They added a milk shed, improved the irrigation system, planted fruit trees that would bear in a few years. The house that had been so sparse when Hannah first arrived was now full of life and laughter. Toys scattered across the floor, Vincent's boots by the door, Hannah's sewing basket on the table, William's cradle in the corner. On William's 2nd birthday, they hosted a gathering for the town's families, the first real party the farm had ever seen. People came from all over, bringing food and gifts, children running wild in the yard while adults talked and ate. Hannah stood on the porch watching the scene, William on her hip, and felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. Vincent came up beside her and wrapped his arm around her waist. "Happy. More than I ever thought possible," Hannah said honestly. She looked up at him, at this man who had changed everything. "Do you remember that first day, when you stopped by the road and saw me trying to plow that field alone? I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever seen," Vincent said with a smile, "and the most impressive." I knew right then that you were someone special. I thought you were crazy, Hannah admitted. Offering to help for almost nothing, I kept waiting for the catch. And was there one? Just that I fell completely in love with you, Hannah said softly. If that counts. Vincent turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. That is not a catch. That is the best thing that ever happened to me. You and this boy right here and this farm and this life we built together. All of it. Best things that ever happened. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, while William made an annoyed sound at being squished between them. They broke apart laughing, and Hannah felt so full of happiness she thought she might burst with it. Life continued its steady forward march. William grew into a bright, energetic child who loved following his father around the farm, helping with chores in the way that small children do. Hannah discovered she was pregnant again when William was 3, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived on a mild spring day, an easier birth than William's had been. They named her Margaret Rose, Rose for Hannah's mother and Margaret because it was a name they both simply liked. Vincent was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, and watching him cradle the tiny girl with such tender care made Hannah's heart swell. The farm continued to prosper. They hired additional help during busy seasons, became known throughout the area as one of the most productive and well-run operations. Vincent's reputation for fairness and quality work meant they always had buyers for their crops, and Hannah's careful management ensured they saved and invested wisely. When William was 7 and Margaret 4, they finally purchased the adjacent 20 acres, doubling their property size. It was a massive undertaking, requiring more workers and more planning, but they had the experience and resources to manage it now. Vincent built a larger house on a rise overlooking both properties. A real house with separate bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Moving into it felt like a final confirmation that they had truly made it, that the desperate woman and the wandering cowboy who had made a bargain in a field 8 years ago had built something lasting and real. On the night they moved in, after the children were asleep in their new rooms and the last box was unpacked, Hannah and Vincent sat on the front porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. You ever think about how different things could have been? Hannah asked. If you had not stopped that day, if you had just ridden past. I think about it sometimes, Vincent admitted, but I do not think I could have ridden past. Something told me to stop, to offer help. Maybe it was fate or luck or God's will. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every day. I am grateful you listened, Hannah said. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. You saved my life. You saved mine too, Vincent said quietly. I was lost when I found you, drifting with no purpose, no home, nothing to anchor me. You gave me all of that. You gave me everything. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant call of coyotes and the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods they had planted around the house. I love you, Hannah said finally, more than I did yesterday. More than I will tomorrow, but always so much it amazes me. Vincent turned and kissed her temple, his arm tightening around her shoulders. I love you too, from that first day until my last day. That is my promise. The years continued to unfold in a steady rhythm of seasons and growth. William showed an aptitude for the business side of farming, often sitting with Hannah as she did the books and asking questions about profit margins and market conditions. Margaret inherited her father's love of animals and spent hours in the barn with the horses and cows, gentle and patient with even the most skittish creatures. When William was 14, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring family, a sweet girl named Emma who Hannah approved of immediately. Vincent taught his son about treating women with respect and care, using his own relationship with Hannah as the example. Margaret showed no interest in boys yet, too busy with her beloved horses and plans to breed them someday. Hannah and Vincent grew older together, their hair gaining silver threads, their hands becoming more weathered with work. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something rich and complex and utterly essential. They still stole moments alone when they could, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other across a room and felt that spark of recognition and joy. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Hannah with a trip to California to visit Alice, who now had 5 children of her own. They left the farm in William's capable hands and traveled west, seeing places neither had been before, staying in hotels and eating in restaurants and behaving like young people in love. "I cannot believe it has been 20 years, Hannah said one evening as they sat on the beach watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "It feels like no time at all and also like forever." 20 years, Vincent repeated, taking her hand, "and I would do every day of it again exactly the same." "Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner, but otherwise all of it, every moment." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think our story is unusual, how we came together?" "I think every love story is unusual in its own way," Vincent said thoughtfully. "But yes, ours is special. We built something from nothing. We took a failing farm and desperate circumstances and turned it into a legacy. That is not something many people can say." "We did it together," Hannah emphasized. "I could never have done it alone." "Neither could I," Vincent said. "That is the point. Together we are stronger than either of us could ever be separately. That is the secret, I think. Finding someone who makes you better, who you make better in return, building something that is more than the sum of its parts." They returned to Arizona refreshed and happy, and life continued its steady course. William married Emma when he was 19, and they built a house on the far corner of the property, staying close to the family farm. Margaret continued to resist romance until she was 23, when she met a veterinarian who came through town and fell hard for him within a week. They married quickly and stayed nearby as well, drawn by Margaret's love of the land and animals. Grandchildren arrived, and Hannah and Vincent stepped back from the daily farm work, letting the younger generation take over while they provided guidance and support. They were not idle, though. Vincent spent his time woodworking and helping neighbors with construction projects. Hannah volunteered at the rebuilt church and taught reading to children whose families could not afford proper schooling. They grew old together, blessed with good health and strong family ties. On their 40th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the farm for a celebration that lasted all weekend. There were more than 30 people now, children, grandchildren, cousins, and friends who had become family over the years. Standing on the porch of the house Vincent had built, looking out over the land they had transformed from failing to flourishing, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace. She had been so afraid once, so certain she would lose everything. Now she had more than she ever could have imagined. Vincent came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that often now, comfortable in silence, needing no words to communicate their feelings. "No regrets?" he asked softly, a question he had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Hannah answered, as she always did. "You?" "Only that I cannot live this life all over again," Vincent said. "But I suppose once is enough. Once with you is enough." Hannah turned in his arms to face him, looking up at this man who had been her partner, her love, her home for 40 years. His hair was white now, his face lined with age, but his blue eyes were still as clear and kind as the day he had appeared on the road and offered to work alongside her. "I love you," she said, words that had never lost their meaning or their power. "I love you too," Vincent replied, and kissed her with all the tenderness of 4 decades of devotion. The sun set behind them, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the farm lay quiet and peaceful in the gathering dusk. The fields that Hannah had once struggled with alone were now lush and productive, worked by the next generation. The house that had been bare and desperate was now full of life and laughter and love. It was not the life Hannah had imagined when she stepped off that train from Missouri so many years ago, frightened and alone. It was better. It was everything. And it had all started with a cowboy stopping by the side of the road and saying 5 simple words. "From now on, we work together." Those words had changed everything. They had built a partnership that became a romance, that became a marriage, that became a family, that became a legacy. They had taken broken things and made them whole. They had turned desperation into hope and hope into reality. And through it all, they had done it together, just as Vincent had promised on that first day. Together through the hard work and the good years, through children and grandchildren, through every challenge and every joy. Together, always together, from that first moment until the very end. It was, Hannah thought as she stood in Vincent's arms watching the sun set on another day, the best story she could have ever imagined. And the best part was that it was real. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph, all of it real and earned and shared with the man who had become her everything. The cowboy had stopped to help a woman working alone, and in doing so, he had given them both a future neither could have created on their own. That was the magic of it, Hannah realized. Not that Vincent had saved her, though he had, but that they had saved each other, giving one another purpose and partnership and a love that had lasted a lifetime. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and the family slowly gathered inside for dinner, Hannah took one last look at the land spread out before them. This farm, this life, this love, all of it had grown from a single moment of kindness and connection. All of it had bloomed from 5 simple words and the courage to believe in them. From now on, we work together. It had been a promise, a vow, and a prophecy all at once. And they had kept it faithfully for 40 years, would keep it for whatever years remained. Together, always together, until the very end and beyond. That was their story. That was their legacy, and it was good.